Is Aces of Thunder, Birds of Steel, Wings of Prey going to finally be the reason that Gaijin decides to kill off War Thunder Sim, shut the servers down, and force everyone to migrate to a new game? This is Beer Thunder. I am Squish, and I'm here to answer these very, very obviously misleading questions. Speaking of things that are completely unfinished, in the background you will see the TA-154 Mosquito, one of the planes of all time, one of the planes that if the glue was just slightly less flammable and slightly stronger, it might have won the war. Anyways, let's get into today's topic of discussion. Gaijin's new flight simulator game that is very, very heavily based on War Thunder, almost a more or less a one-for-one copy of what we already have in War Thunder, but optimized for virtual reality with some features that are specific to virtual reality. Because I've seen people in my community and other sim communities kind of like react to this new game with the idea that War Thunder is finally getting around to killing off sim, because there's kind of like this perception within the community that sim is this like thing that loses money for Gaijin, where the effort that they put into keeping it running is greater than the benefit that they get from it. And I don't think that's actually true. I think that the amount of cost that's involved in keeping, the 50 to 60 people at any one time that are playing the game is basically pennies. Like, I think one of the reasons that the split lobby thing, where the lobbies like split and then merge on top of each other, is because maybe there's just not a lot of resources dedicated to keeping the sim servers running. There's certainly not anyone that's been developing the game mode or doing any kind of like significant changes for, as far as I am tracking, at least over a year, probably more in line with 2 to 3 years. Sim EC is basically a statically dead game mode as far as development is concerned. There's not been any bug fixes. Like probably 7 or 8 months ago, Enigma, the DCS guy, came to War Thunder, was like, oh, this has a lot of potential, made this solicitation for a gigantic list of sim suggestions to forward to Gaijin, and it went directly into the paper shredder, which is what I said was going to happen. It's like, well, they're not going to do anything with it, and the fact that they didn't do anything with it might be just because those resources are dedicated to making this new VR game. But I don't really think that that's necessarily the case either. I think that the development for the VR game is specific to the things they are implementing in VR, like basically pseudo clickable, reachable, grabbable stuff in the cockpit. Greg's Airplanes did a kind of interesting video, kind of like how the game works and how you can kind of grab things in the cockpit, which means I think that War Thunder is expanding into a market that falls more in line with DCS, IL2, and a couple of the other like real quote-unquote flight sims, where they're trying to get into a more happy medium of like the casual market, where guys can pick it up, they plug it in, they put in their VR headset, and they can go around, they can fly planes, and they can kind of do most everything, and they are using basically the sim mechanics that we have as kind of like the baseline for it, or the sim flight models, quote-unquote flight models, because really sim flight models aren't really different. They're just like slightly altered, where some of the features are turned on and some of them are turned off. For instance, from what I have seen of the new VR game, is that they are not doing a full sim. They don't have the prop torque effects turned on. They have basically what we would call in our game realistic joystick, which means the instructor limits are turned off, but what is called auto trim is turned on. But auto trim in practice is basically turning off a lot of those prop torque effects. That's how they kind of get to the end result. So in the new VR game, Aces of Thunder, the planes will actually be easier to fly. And Aces of Thunder doesn't encompass all of the eras that War Thunder encompasses. Right now it looks like it is kind of dialing back, and it's going to be a smaller game that is focused mainly on World War II combat. Now, I do expect them in the future that if they do have commercial success, which, by the way, looking at the advertising for the game, looking at the marketing that they're doing, they are putting the alpha slash beta test in the hands of the right people that can drum up support for the game, or at least let people know that it exists. Like the fact that they went to the Greg's Airplanes channel and then went to a bunch of other channels to kind of advertise the game more or less for them. Like, yes, I know Greg isn't being paid to do it, but just building general awareness and kind of marketing towards the historical airplane YouTube niche as opposed to like a competitive gameplay Top Gun boom boom exploding niche. It might be something that actually works out. Now, as far as the gameplay goes, one of the things that I've kind of said in the past is that the game doesn't need to do more with more. It could really benefit from dialing back and doing more with less. I think that the fact that War Thunder has moved to the point where it has thousands and thousands of different variations of airplanes, and there's so much choice all of the time, and the game is kind of balanced around those choices, that means that kind of our sim experience might be not as good as it could be. With that being said, that doesn't mean that this new game is going to be a lot better, but for a second, let's imagine that if War Thunder had less planes and they had less of the problematic planes, so say for instance 6.0 BR JU-288 spam is kind of an issue. It's kind of an issue if you are looking for gameplay experience. It's an issue if you're looking for kind of like something that's exciting. It's not an issue if the game mode exists just as a grinding mechanism. If the game mode just exists for progression, then the JU-288 is perfectly fine, and whatever. It makes perfect sense that you would play it. But for people that actually want to play the game and want to like get into fights, having those like really powerful grinding planes that kind of suck up all the oxygen in the room means that you spend so much time trying to find a game and find something that's interesting that your time is better spent elsewhere. This new game might solve that. This new game also might not solve that. This new game might start adding those planes back in as means of power creep, means of kind of like getting people to engage with the gameplay, even if the gameplay is not the focus. Because I think one of the biggest things that I've seen in the last like 20 years, because I've been playing games like this for like over 20 years. I played the original Wings of Prey, Wings of Steel, or whatever the very first version that came out on Xbox 360. Yes, I know there was computer versions before that, but no, I wasn't. I had an Xbox 360, so I played that one. That was my kind of like big flight simulator World War II game, and a lot of the legacy stuff from that game is still the same in this game today. But one of the big things that happened over those 20 years is that things stopped being about gameplay and they started being about progression. Adding progression mechanics was kind of like a big thing. Like Call of Duty 4, when it first came out, one of the kind of innovative features, for at least for that Call of Duty game, was that you had to unlock everything, and because you unlocked everything and you kind of added all these sounds and you felt like you were progressing, people would just do that. And then they would get to the end game, they would get all the stuff for multiplayer, they'd have all the guns unlocked, all the guns like good to go, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna prestige to just do the unlocking thing again, where just doing the unlocking thing was in a lot of ways kind of the entertainment or the prestige of being the guy who did the same thing over and over 10 times. Where I think that this newer kind of generation of gamers, because a lot of people haven't experienced games that were just focused on gameplay, haven't played games where playlists were basically you had to choose what you wanted to do, and games had to add different things to do, otherwise you'd get bored of them really quick. You didn't have like just one core game mode. You didn't have like Halo 3 wasn't just one version of Team Deathmatch. Halo 3 was like Team Deathmatch, Big Team, Capture the Flag, Stupid Zombies modes, like a bunch of random stuff. And then there was like a bunch of custom game modes too, where like you do races in the sky and a bunch of crap. Our kind of newer set of games are all not focused on that. It's not really community based. It's more just kind of rewards based, where I think that at some point because we've exposed ourselves to these kind of games for so long that really what we crave, and we don't want to admit that what we crave, is the dopamine rush of hearing ding, 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 target destroyed, and then seeing the leaderboard, and that's it. And I don't know if this new game is actually going to solve that. I don't actually think that it will, because from the looks of the replays and the looks of the kind of footage that I've seen, is that it looks like Gaijin is going back into their vault, and they're going to recycle a bunch of the stuff that's been tried in the past, and a bunch of the stuff that might not be all that engaging, all that fun, or all that necessarily balanced. One of the things I bring up all the time is the old RRB Wake Island map, where American planes start on the runway, Japanese planes start with an air spawn, where you take off and you just kind of die. Like that game, it's not the mode, because the mode was RB, so it's different. But the way that the game was set up had like a historical premise, but the way that that historical premise typically worked out in the game was basically one side won and the other side lost probably 3 out of 4 times. It was not very good. The other thing that I'm going to be really interested with this new game, not just how they approach gameplay and how they're going to organize the gameplay, because it'll be interesting to see what they do, is what they do with the community and what the community does. Because what I think is going to happen is that once the game releases, there's probably going to be a diaspora from Prop Sim for War Thunder. Not like a super one, but I think we will see a solid 1/3 of the population that we currently have go down to at least go and try the game out. The other thing that I'm really interested to see is, what is Gaijin going to do to organize that community? Are they going to give them their own specific forum? And the reason I'm interested in that is because I think that a lot of the issues that we got to see over the years in War Thunder, as far as balancing goes, as far as the way that players play the game, as opposed to playing the way that the game is quote-unquote intended to be played, it might cause some issues. I think it'll be really exciting to see maybe people come to the realization that American planes are not good at turn fighting, or maybe come to the realization that things like the J2M2, when they fight things like, say for instance, the P40, where there's no good way to balance that. The J2M2 just does everything better, where I think we will see a lot of complaints where some of the things that seem like small details these days, because of the way that War Thunder's power crept into like some extreme forms of imbalance, where we're basically resetting the clock on what amounts to a flight sim community. I think that will be really exciting to see. I think it'll be exciting to see how players react to, say for instance, the fact that the BF-109F4 at 4.0, or the 4.0 equivalent BR, is a very strong, very rewarding plane with like a high skill ceiling, but even at the skill floor against most typical American things like P-51Cs, P-51D5s, for instance, I think that we will see a lot of players join those games, get into the game, and then realize that the P-51 won the war, but it won the war at like 30,000 feet or whatever, and if the game doesn't cater to that, and I don't think that it will, because most of their game modes don't cater to that, and none of the game modes in the past have catered to that kind of like combat, where I think people are going to be not disappointed. I think like the real connoisseurs of like aviation, blah blah blah, sim stuff will be happy, because in the current state of the game, the way that American stuff works, the way that everything is balanced, is, at least at these tiers, for all intents and purposes, it's pretty good. There's small issues, they could be changed, but really, in all honesty, you take a couple planes, you bump them up by the equivalent of 0.3 to 0.7 BR, and bump a couple planes down, it'd be fine. But I do think that depending on the way the game is structured, you're going to see a degree of frustration. The other thing that I'm going to be interested in seeing too is the Aces of Thunder community going to be larger than the current sim community? Because if it is, the next question becomes, how long is that going to last? And how is Gaijin going to engage those people? What is going to be the progression mechanism? Like, is it going to be unlockable planes, or is it going to be a game that's just like IL2, where you buy the packs, you buy whatever you want, and you have the full entire plane from the first day? I'm kind of hoping for the latter, where it is focused more on, you get the plane and then you play the plane that you like, and that's kind of is what it is, and then the development and the engagement goes into creating interesting gameplay scenarios and things that will interest people. But then it kind of comes back to the first part of, like, are we actually capable of doing a game like that these days? And I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that no, not really. I'm kind of really cynical in the aspect that I think that a lot of people really do want to hear the ding and get the thrill of the victory, as opposed to kind of the drudgery of getting good, or the drudgery of, I worked really hard for 1 or 2 kills, and the skill there was hard. It was not easy, and it was the reward mechanism just didn't get triggered and just tickled in just the right way. I think it's also kind of the same reason that one of the things I found out probably a couple weeks ago is that games like Fortnite, when I played them, when it, like, the very first season when it came out, like, you didn't have bots on the enemy team. It was all players. And apparently they have added bots to the game so that normal players will get to have the experience of killing things that they perceive to be other players, which I think is interesting, because it means that, because they have millions and millions of dollars to spend on research, that it means that this kind of, like, engagement model of tricking people is something that obviously works, which might be unfortunate. It also just might be a consequence of video games becoming more accessible to people, where they want to provide the gamer experience without, having to cater to hardcore gamer nerds like me, which it's fine. It'll buff. The thing is, if there's custom game modes, we're always capable of making customs. But at the same time, even in War Thunder Sim, a game mode that people say is fundamentally broken, buggy, a mess, unbalanced, you really do not see a large dedicated custom game community. Usually the closest thing that you have to a custom game community in War Thunder Sim is Wingling Dragon and Crab Nation doing, like, bomber formation flyouts, but they do those in EC games, and those games are kind of specifically, like, they're neat, but the draw is to do, like, a giant formation of bombers for the fun of it. It's not so much as balancing the game based on, like, the competitive merits of each plane. Like, we don't have our own kind of, like, not Thunder League, but, like, Jet Strike style kind of tournament squadron battles in War Thunder Sim. Even the guys that were in dedicated squadrons, when you play the random game against them and you bring your own dedicated squad against them, usually what happens is they stop stomping and they're like, oh, I don't want to play this anymore, because now all of a sudden we go from going 2-1 and being able to 3 or 4 person advantage everything that we go against, and have, like, a nice skill gap between us and the enemy team. Once that's reversed, when they're on the receiving end of it, all of a sudden that's not fun anymore. That rewards receptor isn't triggered. So, like, I'm really excited to see this new game. I'm really excited to see what they do. I'm really excited to see, like, whether or not the Greg's Airplanes, the airplane consumer historical osphere of people are going to get involved in the game, and to see what happens with that. I think that'll be exciting to see. I think it'll be exciting to see how people react to basically balances of power that are already established, and whether or not Gaijin's going to give our new gamers their own forum so that we can kind of, like, spectate and watch people complain, like, oh, the 109F4 is overpowered, the A6M is overpowered, the the P-51 is not fast enough, the P-51 guns aren't good enough, or stuff like that. I think it'll be exciting to have a window into what War Thunder was like basically 10 years ago, because it's gonna happen. It is 100% going to just be a fact of life that something like the Yak 3 is going to come in, blow people up, and the fact that Gaijin is made by, well, not Gaijin is made by, because Gaijin is the studio, but because War Thunder was initially made by some Russian people, 10, 15 years ago, that the Yak 3 being good in the game is evidence of Russian bias. Like, I'm 100% sure we're going to see that. The other thing that I'm going to be interested in seeing, though, is what is the player retention going to be like? Like, is the player base going to stick around, or is it going to be highly transitional or highly transactional? Because that's kind of the way that I think that War Thunder works, kind of in the big picture, that it gains a bunch of new players, and they stick around for 30 to 60 days, grinding in their grinder mobile at 10.3 BR, 11 BR, whatever the F5C is, and they get to the thing, they realize that the thing that they wanted didn't really make them have fun, and then they quit. But because the cycle is constantly ongoing, there's always 100,000 people online for at least the primary game modes. For the secondary, third-dairy, quadruple-dairy game modes like Sim, this game mode by itself has been declining. Now, the decline might just be due to the fact that summer, people are going outside, people are going out and touching grass because the grass is actually exposed this time of year. People might just be busy. People might just be burnt out, too. People might just not actually enjoy the fact that the Sim mode hasn't really seen any development and seen any kind of, like, changes, and not so much as just gameplay changes, but just, like, basic bug fixes. Things like making the convoy AA not obliterate you right away. That would have been like a huge quality of life thing. But we don't see that. So maybe people are just burnt out. Maybe the new game will kill off Sim. But either way, I'm going to be watching closely, and I'll be reacting to it. Anyways, that's a Bear Thunder.